Hello everyone. Today we will be discussing fair division games and their basic elements. So what is a fair division game? Well, a fair division game is basically a scenario where we have some set of assets and we are trying to divide this in a fair manner between two or more players. Now, the idea when we have a fair division game is that every player wants to receive at least a fair share or a proportional share of the assets. Now, the assets that are being divided can be all sorts of things. There's really two main kinds that we'll look at. So we have first what we call continuous assets. And continuous assets are basically something that can be divided in an infinite number of ways. So say you have a plot of land that you are trying to divide between three people. There's an infinite number of ways that you can split up that plot of land. So this was what we would call a continuous asset. Discrete assets are the flip side of this, which is basically where we have a set of indivisible objects that we are trying to divide between the people that are involved in the fair division game. So this would be something like, say you have a box of 25 books and you're trying to divide this among 6 people. This would be an example of a fair division game with discrete assets. Now, when we have fair division games, there's a few assumptions that we make that sort of help us make sure that these work properly, basically. So these 4 assumptions listed right here are what we're dealing with. So first assumption is rationality. What this basically means is that we are assuming that every player in the fair division game wants to receive the best possible share in the end, and we are assuming that they are being driven entirely by reason when they are trying to achieve this. The second assumption is cooperation. This basically just means that all of the players are participating willingly in the fair division game and following the method that's being used properly, basically. Third assumption, privacy. What this basically means is that the players do not know each other's value systems. So they do not necessarily know, say player A does not know how much each share of the assets is worth to player B, who does not know how much each share of the assets is worth to player A or C, or so forth and so on. This means basically that the players cannot predict what the other players are going to do. And then the last assumption is what we call symmetry. What this means is that every player is going to receive a proportional fair share of the assets. So say we have a fair division game within players, a fair share is 1/n of the total assets. So to sort of illustrate what this might look like, I have an example right here that basically is where we have a fair division game with 4 players, and we have 4 different shares of the assets that we are trying to allocate to these 4 players. And what I have written here is basically what percentage of the value of the total assets each share is worth to each player. So for instance, player A says that share 1 is worth 10% of what all of the assets are worth, or what all of the shares are worth together. Share 2 is worth 40% to player A, 30% for share 3, 20% for share 4. Player B says that all 4 of them are worth the same, 25%, and so forth and so on. So when we're trying to figure out a fair division, in this case, a proportional fair share, since we have 4 players, so 1/4 of the total assets is a fair share. That would be 25%. So now we basically just want to figure out, okay, which shares are fair shares to each player. So for A, We have 2 shares that are worth at least 25%, so share 2 and share 3. Player B, all of them are worth the same at 25%, so any of these are going to be fair shares for player B. Player C, shares 1 and 2 are worth 30%, so those are fair shares. Shares 3 and 4 are only worth 20%, that's less than the 25% we need, so those are not fair shares for player C. And then finally, player D, the only share that's not a fair share is share 2, which is only worth 15%. All of the rest of them are worth at least 25% or more. So now we just need to figure out a way of splitting these up so that everyone gets one of their fair shares, basically. So one way that you could potentially do this, we could say, okay, player A gets share 3, that's 30%. Player D, we'll say, gets share 4 for 35%. Player C gets share 1, worth 30%. And then share 2 is left for player B, who values all of them the same at 25%. Now, are there other ways that we could have done this? Absolutely. We could have, for instance, switched things around so that player B has share 3 and player A has share 2, which is worth 40% to player A instead of 30%. That would be better for player A, but that does not mean that this is not a fair division. So this is still a fair division because every player receives at least a share that's worth 25% or more to them. Ultimately, if there's 2 players that say player A wants share 2 more than share 3, player B, they're the same, they could just swap shares at the end of all of this and be totally happy with that, right? So a fair division means that everyone receives at least a proportional fair share, not that every player necessarily receives the best share for them. Thank you for watching, and if you have questions about any of this, I'm happy to help.